Welcome to InFocus with Ejaz. This program is supported by the Center for Security Strategy and Policy Research. A word about CESPA. It's an autonomous policy research center housed in the University of Lahore and studies contemporary security and strategic developments. This program is part of that effort. Now we're going to discuss India's election in this episode. It's entered the third phase. And the exercise, which began on 19th April, will conclude on 1st June. And it involves about, 969 million registered voters. Gosh, that's 10% of the global population. The ruling Bharatiya Janata Party says a vote for them denotes progress for India. The opposition bloc, the Indian National Developmental Inclusive Alliance, which is the acronym for India, is appealing to the electorate to save democracy and protect the constitution. Now, the first two phases registered a dip in voter turnout compared to 2019, which apparently is one reason why the incumbent Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been exhorting the BJP voters to come out in numbers and vote for the National Democratic Alliance, the coalition bloc led by the BJP. Given the enormity and complexity of the exercise, it is generally difficult even for psephologists to accurately predict the results, but so far many political observers say the odds are perhaps in favor of NDA. In any case, this episode is not an exercise in bean counting, but to try and look at how India will come out on the other side of these elections, domestically and externally. And to discuss these issues, I have with me Suhasini Haidar, Diplomatic Affairs Editor at The Hindu. She joins me from New York. Siddharth Varadarajan, founding editor of Wire.in and former editor of The Hindu from Delhi. And Dr. Yaqoob Bangash, who's Dean of Humanities and Social Sciences at Information Technology University and author of A Princely Affair, Accession and Integration of the Princely States of Pakistan, 1947-55. Now, of course, I am not much of a maths person. And as I said, and I'm quite positive that neither of you folk are maths people, and we are not psephologists, so it's not about bean counting. But I'm kind of going to flag, let me say, 3 or 4 issues. One is about internal politics. Then you have the international dynamics, and you have trade and economics, and perhaps the climate issues. So let me begin with Siddharth here. Internal politics, in the last 10 years or so, we've seen the rise of a powerful centralized government. And it is also bolstered by a very clear popularity of Prime Minister Modi. Now, on the downside, this has raised questions about executive accountability, and it has also challenged, in many ways, what some would describe as the federal character of India and curtailed civil liberties. Now, in the event that NDA returns to power, do you think that you're going to see more of what India has witnessed in the last 10 years, or perhaps in the third term, things might begin to look different?
I think the answer to that question depends on the precise contours of the result. And in particular, I would say there are 4 scenarios. The first is the scenario that Mr. Modi dangled for the party faithful, which is one of ab ki baar 400 par, that the BJP will return with 400 plus seats. And, in other words, with a dramatic increase in the number of seats, it has 303 right now. So that's scenario 1. And I deem it, of course, very unlikely. Scenario 2 is that Mr. Modi wins on the basis of roughly the same number of seats. In other words, he holds on to what he won in 2019, 300 seats plus or minus.
Which is quite a lot.
Scenario 3 is where he loses seats but and perhaps even falls below the majority mark, but is able to form a government quite comfortably with his NDA allies. And scenario 4 is where the BJP loses quite a lot of seats, upwards of, say, 60 or 70, comes down from 300 odd to around 225 to 230, at which point even an alliance with its existing partners would make it quite difficult for Mr. Modi to return as Prime Minister, and he would need to find new allies or perhaps break other parties. So these are the 4 circumstances under which Mr. Modi is going to come back. And, frankly, we don't know. And the 5th one is, of course, that he loses so many that he doesn't become Prime Minister. But since your question is what happens if he does come back, I would say that the balance of probability lies with the scenarios where his numbers fall, but where he still manages, right? So if he's going to come back, it will be with lower numbers, but where with allies, etc., he's able to form a government. And I think nothing substantial will change in terms of the agenda of his government. The illiberal tendencies towards the opposition, towards the media, the vituperative, visceral stance that the BJP has taken against Muslims in particular, but minorities in general, that will continue. I don't see any of the BJP's allies or potential allies serving as a kind of restraining factor on that front. And essentially, the BJP will do everything it can to come back to a situation where it's able to form a government on its own. So, frankly, I don't see any change if Mr. Modi comes under any permutation. The illiberal, authoritarian, dictatorial tendencies that he has manifested over the last 10 years and which have come into very sharp relief over the past 3 or 4 years will continue without restraint. And I would say that the manner in which he's conducted his campaign, the kind of calculated ugliness which he has thrust upon the public sphere with his repeated baiting of Indian Muslims, targeting of Indian Muslims, spreading fear among Hindu voters that Muslims are going to snatch their jobs, snatch their bhais, snatch their gold and Mangal Sutra, all this kind of nonsense, is also going to have a very unhealthy dynamic in society if the BJP comes back to power in any shape or form. So I would say a return, Mr. Modi's return, even with reduced numbers, will see India domestically on the same trajectory which it has been on so far, of a increasingly circumscribed arena for rights of people. One change may be that the attack on state rights, on the federal principle, which has been very, very pronounced in Mr. Modi's second term. If he needs regional allies, it's possible that the attack on federalism may be tempered somewhat. But even that, quite frankly, I'm not very optimistic.
Okay. So I am hard-pressed for a choice now, because one way of doing this is to take this internal thing to Yaqoob Bangash. The other is to kind of skip over, go to the external, where I'm going to pull in Suhasini. So I'm going to take the latter choice. So Suhasini, the international dynamics. Now, there's rising geopolitical competition in the Indo-Pacific also, which was Asia-Pacific. We're looking at what's happening in the Middle East. And India has been trying to and look to increase its engagement with regional multilaterals. And there's possibly a broad array of partners from the West, but also balancing it with partners in the global South. Loose term, but we know what we're saying here. It's not like a monolith, but nonetheless, it's a term now. And you think that the possibility of success will depend on whether it can maintain its attractiveness as a partner externally. And I ask this because, in a way, it kind of links up with the previous question about what's happening internally, because the attractiveness as a partner externally could be kind of blunted, mounting sort of majoritarianism domestically and more sort of, kind of evidence that internally India is becoming more illiberal?
Well, the first part, the second part to your question, Ejaz, I would certainly say that as long as India's majoritarianism, the kind of worrying trends we're seeing inside India, the push towards a more authoritarian state, as long as they remain internal to India, I don't see that much of a difference. In the last term, for example, within a few months of getting re-elected in 2019, there'd already been that major confrontation with Pakistan. There'd been the dilution of 370. There was the introduction of the Citizenship Amendment Act, and there was the Agricultural Act. And each of these I mentioned because they had international dimensions. Yet, since it was a situation that seemed to come under control inside India, we didn't actually see a pushback internationally. So I don't really anticipate much of an international pushback or pause on relations due to that. I do think that there are other worrying trends in terms of foreign policy for the government to look at. And I think that they will spend the first few months of their government trying to shore up a number of areas. To begin with, in the neighborhood, already we know that the Bangladesh Prime Minister is going to make a visit very shortly in the new term to India. There's already been an outreach to Bhutan just during the election campaign period. In fact, the Maldives as well is expected to see a high-level visit. We've already got the foreign minister coming this week, despite all the tensions we've seen. And I presume that there will be some kind of an attempt perhaps in the next few months to try and see if there's an opening with Pakistan. You in Pakistan have a new government. They've already made a lot of noises on the reopening of trade. We've heard from the foreign minister. We've also heard from the Punjab chief minister, Ms. Sharif. So there is a sense that there are possibilities with Pakistan. They're quite easy, low-hanging fruit in terms of the high commissioners being returned or trade of some sort being restarted. In the broader scheme of this kind of new government with a new confidence, and remember, this will be equalizing the record in India for 3 terms with Prime Minister Nehru. So with that confidence will probably come a desire to also make good on the LAC tensions, the tensions at the line of actual control with China, and see some kind of a détente over there. As far as the West is concerned, we see an immediate opportunity for the new prime minister to reach out, because India has been invited, the Indian prime minister has been invited to the G7 summit in Italy, and that's in mid-June, so just after. And obviously all eyes will be on whether India will take that next step and also join the Western powers when it comes to the Swiss peace conference on Ukraine. At the moment, there's no real indication that India will join that at a high level. But a lot will depend on where the new government sees its priorities. So I do think that on a lot of these issues, you are going to see movement in the next few months, more to shore up the situation, to try and dot I's and perhaps to mend some of those relationships when you have that new momentum of the government. I should also add, Ejaz, that although I only covered foreign policy, I am a statistics graduate. Since you began this by saying none of you know.
Okay, I take my words back. But my own, incapacity, largely to deal with things that are mathematical or statistical, that stays the same. But let me ask you. So you've given a roadmap of sorts of what is likely to happen when the new government comes in. Now, a lot of this also is not particularly about which government comes in, because there are certain determinants and there are certain trends, and there are certain sort of trajectories on which multiple governments have been working. Starting with Mr. Vajpayee, and then Dr. Manmohan Singh, and then Mr. Modi. But in the event that we have an India government, the India coalition bloc government, is that going to have some kind of qualitative difference in terms of regional relations vis-a-vis Pakistan and also China?
I sense not. I think any government that comes to power at this point will need to pay attention to the situation at the LAC with China. It's been 4 years since the standoff began. Certainly, if there is a different government, they will look into the ways in which the current government, the Modi government, has obfuscated the issue, has not come clean about the idea of how much territory in India that China has aggressed. So I think those questions will definitely come up, and any next government, other government than the present, will try to portray these last 4 years in a bad light. With Pakistan as well, there's likely to be some kind of a different tack being taken. But I think at the end of the day, what we've seen is a new normal in Indian foreign policy, one which I sense has a certain amount of non-partisan support. Many of these initiatives, while the government has taken this idea that these are all our initiatives, I sense that the opposition would also put its back in it. It may not be in the same way. It may not be marketed in the same way. It may need to package some of the parts of this foreign policy. But at the end of the day, there is a certain consistency.
But the substance would remain the same.
I think it's with the exception of Pakistan, where the Modi government, after that first outreach, when you saw Prime Minister Modi actually travel to Lahore and all of that. And that was something Prime Minister Manmohan Singh didn't do in 10 years that he was in power. And then you saw the Modi government basically say, we don't need to speak to Pakistan anymore, shutting down every kind of ties, so that we are today in a situation, and some of it was done from the Pakistani side, we're in the situation where there's really no formal conversation between the two countries.
Yeah.
My sense is a different government might do things a little differently.
Right. Before I circle back to the internal politics, SV, you want to add something to what Suhasini has said with reference to international external relations?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that as far as the region is concerned, I don't think that in India-Pak ties are going to see much movement or change. I think Pakistan itself domestically is working through kind of new configurations, and until the first step is taken, which is the restoration of the ambassadors of the two high commissioners, frankly, I don't see
which Suhasini thinks is a low-hanging fruit.
It's low-hanging fruit, but the problem with that low-hanging fruit is that the Indian side is apt to say, and perhaps not without justification, that this is a step that Pakistan has to take, since they were the ones who recalled high commissioners after August 2019. So I think that, and I don't see, I was in Lahore recently and, talking to experts and analysts, I don't see that happen. I don't see domestic sort of permissibility in Pakistan right now. Maybe 3 to 6 months down the road, things may change. I think the Maldives, you see, one of the problems with the Modi administration's regional policy actually is that they have made a mess of the neighborhood. Relations with Pakistan haven't progressed or have nosedived. Relations with the Maldives have nosedived. Even with Bangladesh, which is held up as a kind of shining example of what Mr. Modi has accomplished because he's very close to Sheikh Hasina. This proximity with Dhaka has come at the expense of a tarnished reputation within Bangladeshi civil society, because India and the Indian government is seen as complicit in the vote rigging and all the other terrible things that have happened in Dhaka over the past several years, and in particular the last 1 year. India's ties with Nepal are a bit, I would say, iffy. Modi has neglected the region, even though he claims to be a great foreign policy sort of expert, and I don't see that changing. China will remain a big problem, and Modi has ducked, as Suhasini very rightly said, and she knows this in detail. The Modi government has ducked the border issue with China, and I don't see that changing either. Frankly, on the world stage, India may be invited to the Swiss conference on Ukraine, but frankly, we don't have a view on whether it's Ukraine or Gaza, India is not, other than saying this is not an era of war, India has nothing positive to offer in terms of a formulation or a suggestion or a proposal that the world can try to take forward. And other countries in the global south have been far more active and far more constructive than India has been. So, I don't think that the record of the Modi government on the foreign policy front is great, and I don't see that changing if he comes back. An India victory, may be different, may produce some different outcomes. But as far as the region goes, I think Suhasini is quite right that the region, I don't see too much changing in the next 6 to 8 months.
Right. Dr. Yaqoob Bangash, so you have been hearing the other panelists patiently, which serves you right since you joined late. So how about you give me your assessment of the internal and then also the external?
Great, thank you, Ejaz. And of course, they are the experts, so of course we're learning from the people on the ground, so to speak. I think the 4 scenarios that Siddharth posited, I think, yeah, those are the ones to consider. Of course, the last one is, perhaps, the hope of a lot of people, but it might not happen. They will probably come back to power. But I think if the NDA and the BJP does suffer a hit in terms of its seats, that will hit bits of its confidence. And my scare, therefore, is that if the NDA government comes back with fewer seats, it might actually ratchet up its Hindutva kind of mode. And for that, my kind of recent example is, the BJP Karnataka sort of line that they've been taking. I'm quite sure a lot of the viewers, and I'm sure like all of us, saw that Karnataka kind of that cartoon meme kind of a thing where it showed that there were these the other backward classes and the scheduled tribes and the scheduled castes in this basket, and the Muslim comes and it's the big egg, and it thrashes the rest of them out of it. So in Karnataka, where the BJP actually in 2019 had a very good go, they are now fearing that they might lose some seats, and therefore this kind of a very strong anti-Muslim thing has come out. Similarly, Modi's jibes against the Congress are not now related to just the Congress internal politics or it being a big like an elitist party or kind of thing. Recently, he actually compared and said, Congress and Pakistan are all together, and if you support Pakistan, then you only can support the Congress and all that. So these kind of things show that things might sharpen if they lose votes, because this is their base constituency. And if they lose some seats, it might come back in a stronger force. And I think that's something that one must take into consideration. On the other side, I think what's really fascinating, and I think it's very underreported, it's very much well reported in Indian digital media, but in Indian television and elsewhere, it's kind of very little reported that there is no even playing field in terms of the opposition in India. And I think that's very important to understand. We know what just happened in Surat, where the Congress candidate, his proposer and secretary, stood up and said that we haven't signed this. And then the candidate himself disappeared. A lot of people have changed sides towards the BJP in the last couple of days. Even. And of course, the whole famous thing that, that the BJP and Modi have this washing machine where if you are an opposition politician and you have cases against you, you join the BJP and all of a sudden the ED, the Enforcement Directorate kind of drops all those cases. And then, again, we have a sitting chief minister, Kejriwal, in jail at the moment. So I think the fact that the opposition really has no even playing field, the Congress is, a lot of its bank accounts have been...
Bangash, just a data point, since you talked about the Enforcement Directorate cases. So, according to most studies, about 95% of the Enforcement Directorate cases since 2014 have been against opposition leaders. And this, according to one of the studies, is a 4-fold rise compared to similar cases under the previous regimes. Now, in March 2023, 14 political parties approached the Indian Supreme Court about what they call the quote-unquote misuse of these agencies against opposition parties and civil society actors. Now, these particular elections have also been preceded by the news of the freezing of bank accounts of the Indian National Congress, which is obviously the largest opposition party and leads the India bloc. So there are a number of things that have happened, and I just want to quickly take this back to SV, which is clearly, and this is something that we have seen in Pakistan over many, many years, that you rig the system. So give us a sense of, the NDA or the BJP governments, or some would say the Modi-Amit Shah duo, brainchild of rigging the system in a way that the BJP and the NDA already has an advantage in any electoral contest against any opposition bloc?
Well, I'll mention 5 factors off the top of my head, which your viewers will find informative, hopefully informative, and can relate to. The first is that the BJP has a much larger war chest than any other party. In fact, I would estimate that they have more money than all the other parties combined, and then some. And they've amassed this through regular donations. They've amassed this through these electoral bonds, which they had hoped would remain anonymous. And frankly, they have amassed it through other means, because in a report that we ran in the Wire by M. Rajshekhar, who's an investigative journalist, he looked at patterns of expenditure by the BJP in terms of, they've put up swanky new buildings in every district across the country in the last 3 or 4 years, spending thousands of crores of rupees. They spend a huge amount in campaigning, and the amount that we conservatively estimate that they have spent is more than their stated income by something like 60,000 crore. So where does this money come from? How has it been spent? How has it been given? Money clearly is the number one factor that I would flag when it comes to the BJP having an undue advantage. The second is the electoral, the electoral watchdog system, right? So we have an independent election commission, and historically, this commission has suffered from one key infirmity, which is that its members have been appointed by the executive. In the past, this hasn't been a problem because governments have kind of not been so blatant in the kind of people that they've selected. And once selected, the election commissioners have not completely surrendered their sort of constitutional obligations in the way in which appointees under the Modi government have done in the past 10 years. It's for this reason that last year the Supreme Court of India admitted a petition challenging the manner in which election commissioners are appointed. And they directed the government to create a new law which would make the selection of election commissioners, it would empower a committee, a panel comprising 3 members, the PM, the leader of the opposition, and the Chief Justice of India. So a panel in which the government would not have a majority. And the court said that only if you have this kind of a panel choosing election commissioners can you guarantee the independence of the election commission. The government promptly went ahead and passed a law where it dropped the Chief Justice of India from the panel and added a second minister. So it has 2 out of 3 votes, and then went and quickly appointed people. And the manner in which the election commissioners have behaved in this election is so craven that people have just given up. They turn a blind eye to every kind of violation by the Prime Minister and by the BJP. Just to give an example to your viewers, this video or tweet that Dr. Bangash referred to, a highly offensive communal tweet, so bad in fact that the Election Commission today directed Twitter to delete it. But it's one thing to tell Twitter to delete it. How come the Election Commission has not issued strictures to the party which produced that video in the first place? It hasn't done so. So that itself tells you something about the partisan nature of the Election Commission, and that's factor number 2. Factor number 3, the misuse of investigative agencies to put opposition leaders behind bars and to freeze their bank accounts. You've spoken about that, and Dr. Bangash has spoken about that. Factor number 4, in the run-up to the election, an inordinate amount of public money was spent in kind of building, in co-branding the BJP along with the government. So, for example, Mr. Modi came up with this phrase, Modi ki guarantee, which is the signature phrase of the BJP in this campaign. Now, this phrase was implanted in the public's mind by a government campaign over the past year, where every government ad and many government hoardings used this phrase, Modi ki guarantee, to extol the virtue of government work. So, in other words, government budgets were spent to promote a phrase.
So there's a very clear sort of conflation of
party
the
and
government with the person of Mr. Modi.
And using public funds. And the fifth and final factor which has unleveled the playing field is his complete control and capture of the media. So barring Suhasini's paper and a few other papers, barring I would say many websites, not just a few, the Indian media, particularly big media, is completely under the thrall of the BJP. You have no television channel today which is willing to cover what's happening in an objective fashion. You just have to watch these so-called interviews that Mr. Modi has been giving to see just how abject the surrender is on the part of big media. So, thanks to these 5 factors, the election that you have is, I would describe it as unfree and unfair. And I would say it's a miracle that despite this, the opposition is still giving the BJP a solid fight, which is why Mr. Modi has, believes he has no option but to resort to the most filthy kind of communal campaigning, where in speech after speech, all he is doing is inciting hatred against the country's Muslim minority and spreading fear.
This time he's also doing something very interesting, in the sense that, Pakistan used to come up off and on in various election campaigns. And the Indian Muslims were sort of, linked up with Pakistan, but this time he is basically saying that the Congress party is pursuing the Pakistani agenda. So he is basically conflating the opposition, the party that leads the opposition bloc, as one presumably in the pay of Pakistan. So it's kind of really amusing at one level, but quite disturbing also at another level. But Suhasini, when we, I'll blame myself also, when we are doing analyses of foreign policy issues or security issues, we tend to sort of analyze them in silos. But I want to ask you, as someone who has obviously done a lot of television, investigative reporting, analyses, and the rest of it, and given also trends elsewhere in the world, where you have now groundswells of majoritarianism or groundswells of ethno-nationalism or the rest of it, is it possible that beyond a certain point one can actually divest the conduct of foreign policy from what's happening internally?
Well, I don't think that anybody, any of the majoritarian populists that you mentioned actually want to divorce the two. I think there's a consistent push when you look at populism worldwide, and there are close to 25 countries now that have been judged in the past decade as having moved in a populist direction. The idea is always that foreign policy is used as a domestic force multiplier. With Mr. Modi, for example, the fact that he is received in capitals worldwide, given a huge welcome, including, frankly, if it hadn't gone off the rails with the terror attack, even in Pakistan, in Lahore, where the Prime Minister went to the airport, where he invited him to the wedding in the family. You see it in capitals around the world.
But just to set the record straight, because I know the story from insiders.
It doesn't matter. Ejaz, what I'm trying to say is that there are optics over
No,
here.
what I'm saying is that
Those
he actually foisted, I mean, it was a beautifully choreographed thing by him.
Okay, well, I mean, we can take this conversation in different directions. We're not discussing what happened in 2015. I'm talking about the optics of the Prime Minister being welcomed in various capitals of the world as something that is pitched in a domestic context as proof of his popularity in the world. Today, you see BJP and ruling party alliance members freely talking about the idea that the Prime Minister actually stopped a war between Russia and Ukraine just long enough to take Indian students out. Now, the idea has been debunked even within the Indian foreign policy establishment, but that doesn't matter. So what you're asking about, the idea that foreign policy should be divorced, could be divorced from domestic, I think it's the opposite. I think populists like the idea of using foreign policy to achieve domestic ends. Now you're asking, I presume, whether in these foreign capitals, the discomfort over what is happening inside India is going to trump bilateral relations. We've not seen evidence of that over the past 10 years. The future, obviously, we can't call, but we're living in times where there's a lot of turmoil around the world.
Okay,
there are
so let me, okay.
behaving badly.
So I take your point, and I think it's a fair point. But here's the thing. I was kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of hinting at this new sort of sense of that we have arrived and we want to project power. And if we want to project power, and you're right, I mean, that is essentially the basis of ethno-nationalism. And whether you do it overtly or whether you do it covertly and then get caught, as India has been, there's, at some point, there's got to be a blowback, because while India has arrived in many ways, it is still not the United States, or it's still not China, or, if you will, it's still not Israel.
So you're speaking about the cases of Panun and Nijar and the allegations made in
just one sort of example. I mean, the Qataris, basically, I mean, they sentenced them to death. 7 senior former naval officers, presumably spying for Israel. And that is one of the reasons that, probably among others, that Al Jazeera was not allowed to actually report the elections from within India, and they've been reporting it from outside. So my point is that ethno-nationalism begins to, and I take your point, which is fair, ethno-nationalism begins to then express itself in many ways. And some of that can, kind of return to bite back.
Sure. I mean, as I said, I think when that, and I put that rider when I said about bilateral relations not being affected so long as this stays within India. The moment it goes outside India, the moment there are provable crimes conducted by the Indian state in other countries. We're still talking about trials that are in process. As far as the Qatari trial goes, we really don't have any details, because that's the Qatari judicial system. It doesn't actually give you any proof or evidence publicly. So what we're looking at is a trial that's set to start sometime this year in the US, arrests that have already happened in Canada, and then those allegations made by the Pakistan Foreign Ministry, which we have not yet seen more details of the Indian involvement, because I think they're talking about Pakistani nationals being used by Indian agencies. So
Washington Post reported some details about
Sure. But those are all details, and frankly, no government is going to move until they actually have some kind of proof to go with. Now, the question is, again, is this going to affect bilateral relations? As far as the relations with Pakistan go, they're no worse off because of the allegations. And I would say that Indian politicians, including the Prime Minister, have actually used Pakistan's allegations to bolster their own claims that they go, this very, very sort of strong Hindi Urdu phrase that "Ghar mein ghus ke marenge," which is something that the Prime Minister says.
Yeah, and by the way, I mean, you have covered the Ministry of External Affairs for a very long time. I'm quite sure that, when Mr. Modi or Amit Shah and others, or the defense minister, when they come and they talk about this, that clearly would not make the MEA people very happy or comfortable, because this can be used against India.
Sure. My simple point is, when we start to see the impact on bilateral relations, things maybe will change. At the moment, as I said, we're not seeing them. When Prime Minister Modi, after the Qataris released the Indian nationals after their trial was done, despite having sentenced them, as you pointed out, to death, they were released. Prime Minister Modi went to Doha. There were meetings at the very top. There was a very warm welcome. I'm just saying that so far we're not seeing that. Yes, in the large scheme of things, theoretically, there will be some amount of pushback. There will be a discomfort with working with a regime that is seen as carrying out extrajudicial, extraterritorial operations in other countries, particularly in friendly countries. Yeah. And we're already seeing that, the discomfort over the fact that the Five Eyes are making public statements. I still have to say, I have not yet seen either the US or the UK or Australia move bilaterally on these issues. So far, what they've said is they're comfortable with the idea that India is conducting its own inquiry, and they're waiting for the results of that.
Right. Yaqoob Bangash, I have to close the program also. Any last thoughts with reference to what has been discussed so far?
Well, I think the one thing, main thing is, I think, at least in terms of Pakistan, it remains to be seen what will happen. My grand kind of hope is, one can always hope anything, is that if Modi comes back to power, he might, in his third term, want to create a legacy. And if he wants to create a legacy of a peacemaker or something, and, wants to say, by the end of it, I'll get the Nobel Prize or something, might want to extend an olive branch to Pakistan and actually resolve issues with it. That's the only reason why he would do it. I think if the India alliance comes to power, I don't think they'll be able to do much, because it'll be a very unwieldy alliance. It'll be always watching its back. And considering Modi has practically run the campaign saying that, the Congress is Pakistan's B team. So the Congress is not going to do too much about that, at least initially. So I think it's kind of a wait and a watch situation. And I'm fearful that at least, this is, at least in terms of Pakistan, it's a wait and watch. But I think whatever happens, I think for the minorities in India, it will not be smooth sailing. And I think, I hope that they are bracing themselves for it.
Okay. So, great discussion. Thank you, Yaqoob Bangash, SV, Suhasini, Haidar. This is all from this episode. If you like the discussion, click on the subscribe button. That helps us bring you quality discussions. Until our next episode, goodbye and stay safe.